Do you know there was once an African general who made the mighty Roman Republic tremble to its core? Do you know he led an army with cavalry, mercenaries, and towering war elephants through blizzards and death traps in the snow-covered Alps, a route Rome thought impossible? Do you know that for over 15 relentless years, Rome lived in fear, whispering his name as a warning to children? Hannibal is at the gates? This is not just a war story. It is the story of Hannibal Barca, the Lion of Carthage, a man born on African soil, whose father made him swear a blood oath as a boy to never be a friend to Rome. From the sun-baked streets of ancient Carthage to the frozen passes of the Alps, from crushing Roman legions at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, to standing face-to-face with Scipio Africanus in the final gamble at Zama. His life was a chain of daring gambles, impossible victories, and unshakable defiance. His name became legend, his tactics are still studied by generals, and his story still asks the question, what if Hannibal had marched on Rome after the victory at Cannae? Would the history of the world have been different? Before we begin, we must acknowledge that history is not always a perfect record. Much of what we know has been passed down for generations, through oral traditions, ancient chronicles, and the writings of those who lived long after the events. Over time, chains of narration can be altered. Some stories are hyperbolized, others downplayed, and some shaped to fit political or personal agendas. Here at Tales of the Ancestors, we strive for accuracy, but we cannot claim to be 100% correct in every detail. If you believe we have stated something in error, we welcome you to share your correction with credible sources in the comments. We will review it and do our best to verify and update. We are all here to learn together about our shared heritage, our rich history, and the story of our beloved continent, Africa. Carthage's story begins with a princess and a new city on African shores. According to legend, the Queen Dido of the Phoenician city-state of Tyre, located in Lebanon, fled from her murderous brother and founded Carthage, meaning new city, on the North African coast. Known only through ancient Greek and Roman sources, all of which were written well after Carthage's founding, her historicity remains uncertain. The oldest references to Dido are attributed to Timaeus, who lived in Taormina in Sicily and died around 260 BC, which is about 5 centuries after the date given for the foundation of Carthage. Timaeus told the legends surrounding the founding of Carthage by Dido in his Sicilian history. By his account, Dido founded Carthage in 814 BC, around the same time as the foundation of Rome, and he alluded to the growing conflict between the two cities in his own day. This small Phoenician trading outpost grew into a mighty mercantile empire. By the 3rd century BC, Carthage dominated much of North Africa, Spain, Iberia, Sardinia, Corsica, and half of Sicily. With a powerful navy and strategic colonies, it rivaled Rome for Mediterranean supremacy. Carthaginians retained a unique Punic culture, speaking a Semitic language and venerating ancient gods like Baal and Tanit, even as they traded and warred with Greeks and Italians. This was the world that produced Hannibal Barca. Hannibal was born in 247 BC to one of Carthage's leading families during the bitter endgame of the First Punic War. His father was Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant Carthaginian general. Barca, meaning thunderbolt, was a nickname earned by Hamilcar for his lightning attacks. Hamilcar fought Rome in Sicily and conducted daring guerrilla raids even into Italy during the 23-year First Punic War, which spans from 264 BC to 241 BC. Carthage ultimately suffered a humiliating defeat in that war, losing Sicily and agreeing to heavy tribute payments. The loss devastated Carthage's economy and pride, sparking a fierce mercenary revolt at home that Hamilcar had to crush in 240 BC to 237 BC. Rome's victory also increased Roman greed. They soon seized Sardinia and Corsica as well, compounding Carthage's humiliation. From a young age, Hannibal thus grew up in a city raging with resentment and longing for revenge. Hamilcar Barca groomed his sons for that revenge. Hannibal's mother's identity is unknown, as Carthaginian noblemen often married foreign wives, but we know Hannibal had two younger brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, and several sisters who married Numidian princes. This hints at Carthage's diverse African background, Punic aristocrats forging ties with indigenous North African royalty. Roman writers later claimed that Hamilcar called his children a brood of lion cubs raised for Rome's destruction, a fierce prophecy. Whether or not he truly said this, it captures the Carthaginian resolve after defeat. Carthage would seek a rematch with Rome, and Hamilcar's eldest cub, Hannibal, would lead it. Hannibal's own legend begins with a dramatic oath. In 237 BC, after Carthage's loss in Sicily, Hamilcar set out to rebuild Carthaginian power in Spain. As the story goes, before departing, he brought his 9-year-old son Hannibal to a sacred altar and made the boy swear eternal hatred against Rome. Ancient authors like Livy and Cornelius Nepos repeat this tale, portraying the child Hannibal laying his hands on a sacrificial animal and vowing never to be a friend to Rome. Whether legend or fact, the oath symbolizes Hannibal's lifelong mission. In Livy's words, Hannibal retained the most reckless daring in undertaking risk and the most judicious calm when in danger, proving more wonderful when facing adversity than in enjoying his success. This balance of boldness and cool strategy became Hannibal's hallmark. As a youth, Hannibal accompanied Hamilcar in the conquest of Hispania, Spain. There, Hamilcar spent years from 237 BC to 228 BC, forging a new Carthaginian realm rich in silver mines and soldiers, resources to fuel a future war. Marching alongside the army, young Hannibal learned the military skills that he would turn against Rome. He was a keen student of warfare under his father's tutelage. According to one account, the rugged campaigns in Spain hardened Hannibal's body and mind. He lived in the field, sharing the toil and simple rations of ordinary soldiers. Hannibal never forgot the hard-won lessons of the First Punic War, that Rome, with its larger manpower, could endure terrible losses and still fight on. To defeat such an enemy, bold and unorthodox strategy would be needed. Tragedy struck in 228 BC when Hamilcar died, drowning in battle according to some sources. Command passed briefly to Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, who continued diplomatic expansion. But Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, and the army in Spain promptly acclaimed Hannibal at age 26 as its commander. The Carthaginian Senate approved Hannibal's appointment, entrusting the young general with a veteran army and his father's ambition to challenge Rome. Hannibal did not hesitate. Over the next 2 years, he secured Carthaginian control over most of Spain, then set his sights on Rome's sphere. By attacking Rome's ally Saguntum in 219 BC, Hannibal lit the fuse of war. After an 8-month siege, Saguntum fell. When Carthage refused Rome's demand to hand over Hannibal in punishment, the Second Punic War erupted. The stage was set for one of history's most epic wars, and Hannibal Barca was at the center, ready to fulfill his oath. In 218 BC, Hannibal launched his audacious plan to bring Rome to its knees. He understood that Carthage's strengths and Rome's weaknesses were now inverted since the last war. Rome held naval supremacy and could strike Carthaginian holdings by sea. But Hannibal had a daring solution. He would neutralize Rome's navy by invading Italy by land, marching over formidable barriers that Romans would never expect an army to cross. His gamble was that if he devastated Italy itself, Rome's allies would falter and Rome would be forced to negotiate peace. This would not be a war for territorial conquest of Rome, but a strategic war to break Rome's alliance network and force favorable terms. So began one of the most legendary journeys in military history. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal marched out of Spain with a multicultural army, perhaps 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and nearly 40 war elephants. He cut north through Gaul, France, overcoming hostile tribes and swollen rivers. By autumn, he and roughly 50,000 remaining troops reached the foot of the Alps, the snow-capped mountains guarding Italy's northern frontier. The Romans, confident in their natural barrier, were stunned to learn where Hannibal was headed. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps has become the stuff of legend, a feat often compared to an act of the gods. Braving high-altitude blizzards and perilous cliffs, Hannibal led his army, including cavalry and elephants, over routes where no army had ever marched. Livy and Polybius describe how Carthaginians carved paths through landslides and fought off mountain tribes in ambush. Men and animals slipped from icy ledges to their doom. By the time Hannibal descended into Italy's Po Valley, his force was whittled down to about 26,000 foot soldiers, 6,000 cavalry, and a few surviving elephants. He had lost over half his army to the elements, at terrible cost. Yet the gamble worked. Hannibal emerged in Italy with a cohesive core of veterans and took the Romans completely by surprise. The Roman Republic, expecting to fight in Spain or Africa, suddenly faced a Carthaginian army on its doorstep. In December 218 BC, Hannibal won his first victory on Italian soil. At the river Trebia, he baited a Roman consular army across an icy river and into a carefully planned ambush. The Romans, half-frozen and exhausted, found themselves enveloped. Hannibal's brother Mago sprang from hiding with a picked force, triggering slaughter. 30,000 Roman troops were killed in the trap. It was a stunning victory, Rome's worst defeat since the First Punic War. But Rome, shocked as it was, refused to surrender or negotiate. The Senate simply raised new legions to replace the fallen. This resilience astonished Hannibal. After Trebia, he marched south in early 217 BC, seeking another decisive blow. Rome sent 2 fresh consuls with another army to stop him. Hannibal's reply was Lake Trasimene, history's largest ambush. In the misty dawn of June 217 BC, beside the fog-shrouded lake, Hannibal hid his forces in the wooded hills. The Roman army, under consul Gaius Flaminius, marched on the narrow road between mountain and water, unaware of danger until it was too late. Hannibal gave a signal, and his troops swept down from the heights, trapping the Romans against the lake. The Roman column was completely caught off guard. In the chaos, Flaminius was killed, and over 40,000 Roman soldiers were cut down or captured in a few hours. The Battle of Lake Trasimene was less a battle than a massacre. an entire Roman army annihilated by Hannibal's cunning. As news of Trasimene reached Rome, panic gripped the city. Livy recounts that wailing matrons crowded the temples, and the Romans coined a new warning cry: Hannibal ad portas. Hannibal is at the gates. To Roman children, Hannibal became a bogeyman. The psychological impact of the Carthaginians' audacity was immense. After Trasimene, in this moment of terror, Rome appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius sized up Hannibal's genius and realized another pitched battle could be national suicide. Rome still had manpower, but Hannibal's superb cavalry and tactical brilliance gave him the edge in open battle. So Fabius adopted a strategy of delay and harassment, avoiding direct fights, shadowing Hannibal's movements, cutting off his supplies, and picking off small detachments. This strategy of attrition earned Fabius the nickname Cunctator, the delayer, and gave Rome precious breathing room. Hannibal raided freely across the Italian countryside, burning towns, devastating farms, nearly 400 towns over 15 years, trying to draw the Romans into battle and to entice Rome's allies to defect. Yet Fabius's caution frustrated him. Many Romans criticized Fabius, chafing at the humiliation of Hannibal roaming Italy unopposed. But Fabius's tactics likely saved the Republic from immediate collapse. By 216 BC, pressure in Rome was mounting to defeat Hannibal outright. The Senate massed the largest army in its history, 8 legions, about 86,000 men, and sent them under 2 consuls to finally crush Hannibal. The confrontation came on August 2nd, 216 BC, on the Apulian plain near the village of Cannae. Both sides understood the high stakes. This would be a fight to decide the fate of Italy. Hannibal at Cannae faced a Roman army nearly double the size of his own. The Romans, hoping to overwhelm by sheer force, packed their heavy infantry in an unusually deep, dense formation. Hannibal, by contrast, devised an ingenious deployment. He placed his weakest infantry, Spaniards and Gauls, in the center in a forward-curving crescent, with his veteran African spearmen on the wings held back in reserve. He positioned his cavalry, superior Numidian light horse and Spanish heavy cavalry, on the flanks, under his able lieutenants Maharbal and Hasdrubal. Please note here that the Hasdrubal mentioned here is Hannibal's brother and not his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair. His plan was daring: draw the Romans in, then envelop them. On the hot morning of Cannae, Hannibal's trap was sprung. He provoked the Romans to attack his center. As the legions pushed forward, smashing into Hannibal's thin middle, the outnumbered Carthaginian line deliberately fell back in stages, its center bending into a concave pocket. The Romans, thinking Hannibal's army was collapsing, drove in further, compressing themselves into the pocket. But Hannibal's flanks held firm. At the crucial moment, his African veteran infantry, positioned at an angle on either side, wheeled inward and struck the Roman flanks in a coordinated counterattack. Simultaneously, Carthaginian cavalry, having swept away the Roman horse, galloped behind and attacked the Roman rear. The trap closed with perfect timing. Surrounded on all sides, the Roman host was trapped in a tightening ring of Carthaginians. Roman infantry, packed shoulder to shoulder, could not even swing their swords effectively. Hannibal's men cut them down methodically. By evening, the Battle of Cannae had become an unprecedented slaughter. Perhaps 50,000, 70,000 Romans and Italian allies lay dead, including a consul, 80 senators, and dozens of officers, the backbone of Rome's army and aristocracy. Only perhaps 15,000 scattered survivors escaped. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history and is still studied as a masterpiece of tactical genius. Hannibal had destroyed the greatest army Rome ever mustered in a single afternoon. In the immediate aftermath, Rome seemed beaten. By almost any reckoning, Hannibal had won the war, one historian writes. Hannibal's losses at Cannae were relatively light, maybe 6,000 men, a testament to his strategy. Shockwaves rippled across the Mediterranean. Rome's Italian allies began to waver. Within weeks, Hannibal defeated several major cities in southern Italy, including Capua, which was then Italy's second largest city. In Sicily, Syracuse rebelled against Rome, and in Macedon, King Philip V allied with Hannibal to open a second front against the Romans. Carthage's fortunes had never been higher. Hannibal's men hailed him as father and savior. At Carthage, despite some aristocratic jealousy, he was honored as a national hero. For Hannibal, it was the zenith of his success, the brilliant culmination of the invasion plan conceived with his father. Yet amid the triumph, a famous moment of counsel occurred. Hannibal's cavalry commander Hannibal, eager to press the advantage, urged Hannibal to march on Rome immediately. "Give me the cavalry in 5 days and you'll dine on the Capitoline Hill," Hannibal supposedly promised. But Hannibal hesitated, concerned about attacking the heavily fortified city. Hannibal, frustrated, remarked, "Assuredly the gods have not blessed one man with all gifts. You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use it." This legendary admonition, recorded by Livy, has echoed through history. Hannibal chose not to assault Rome then and there, a decision hotly debated by historians ever since. Some argue Rome might not have fallen even if attacked, as the city's walls were strong and still guarded by reserves. Regardless, the respite allowed Rome to regroup. Cannae was Hannibal's greatest victory, but paradoxically, it also marked the high watermark of his campaign. Rome did not sue for peace, even after this calamity. Incredibly, the Roman Senate refused even to ransom survivors of Cannae, a grim message that Rome would fight to extinction rather than surrender. The Romans displayed a kind of stubborn resilience that Hannibal himself grudgingly admired. They raised fresh legions from every able-bodied man, even arming slaves and criminals to fill the ranks. They enacted severe emergency measures and shored up the morale of citizens with patriotic fervor. For Hannibal, the immediate strategic goal was achieved. Many Italian allies had been peeled away from Rome. But the core of the Roman Republic, the Senate and the urban population, stood unyielding. The war was far from over. After Cannae, Hannibal made his new base in southern Italy at Capua, and for a time he was master of Italy south of Rome. Over the next several years, from 216 BC to 213 BC, he repeatedly marched near Rome and even camped outside its walls in 211 BC, hoping to incite panic. The phrase "Hannibal is at the gates" became a Roman watchword for dire peril. Yet despite his string of victories, Hannibal faced an increasing strategic dilemma. Rome, bruised but unbroken, shifted to a war of attrition, the very kind of war least suited to Hannibal's strengths. The Romans, reverting to Fabius's strategy, mostly avoided pitched battles with Hannibal for the rest of his time in Italy. Instead, they focused on isolating him, reconquering defected cities one by one, and denying him reinforcement from Carthage or allies. Hannibal's Italian allies gradually learned that Rome's grip, though weakened, was not shattered. When Roman armies besieged Capua, Hannibal's ally, in 211 BC, Hannibal made a bold attempt to draw them off by feinting a march on Rome itself. But the Romans did not take the bait. Capua fell back into Roman hands. Similarly in Spain, Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal Barca struggled against Roman forces led by the Scipio family. In 209 BC, Rome scored a crucial victory by capturing New Carthage, Carthago Nova, in Spain, cutting off Hannibal's main supply base. Hasdrubal eventually decided to bring reinforcements to his brother the same way Hannibal had come, overland into Italy. But the Romans intercepted Hasdrubal in 207 BC at the Metaurus River and utterly defeated him, killing Hasdrubal and scattering his army. When Hannibal learned of his brother's fate, Hasdrubal's severed head was delivered to his camp as a brutal message. He knew the tide had turned. "I knew the Romans had learned how to win," he reportedly said in grim resignation. From that point, Hannibal's campaign in Italy became a holding action. The Romans, led by the rising general Publius Cornelius Scipio, later called Scipio Africanus, systematically conquered Spain by 206 BC, denying Carthage its colonial empire. In Sicily, they neutralized pro-Carthaginian forces. In North Africa, Rome's ally, King Massinissa of Numidia, harassed Carthage's territory. Carthage, politically divided and slow to support Hannibal, sent scant help. Hannibal, with perhaps 30,000 veteran troops still in Italy, found himself increasingly cut off and confined to Bruttium, Calabria, in the toe of Italy. Even after all his victories, he could not force the Romans to peace. The war had become a grinding test of endurance, one favoring Rome's vast resources. Hannibal later said he felt like a tame old lion by the end in Italy, held at bay by iron chains of Roman persistence. By 203 BC, after 15 years of fierce campaigning on Italian soil, Hannibal received orders from Carthage to return home. Rome had changed the game. Scipio Africanus, having conquered Spain, had boldly invaded North Africa, threatening Carthage itself. This forced Carthage's hand. Hannibal's Italian adventure had to be abandoned to defend the homeland. Summoning his remaining troops, still loyal and formidable, but far from their peak strength, Hannibal evacuated Italy, ironically leaving the land he had ravaged as undefeated as when he came. Roman writers record that the indomitable general, who had come so close to toppling their world, departed unable to achieve final victory, yet undefeated in open battle. The Second Punic War would now move to its final stage on African soil, pitting Hannibal against a Roman foe of equal genius. For the first time since his youth, Hannibal set foot again in Africa in 203 BC, but now under dire circumstances. Carthage was reeling from Scipio's assaults and the defection of the Numidian prince Massinissa to Rome's side. Nevertheless, Hannibal's return buoyed Carthaginian hopes. He quickly assembled an army from his seasoned Italian veterans, those he had brought back, and new recruits, including cavalry and war elephants. In 202 BC, outside the town of Zama in North Africa, Hannibal Barca and Scipio Africanus met in a final fateful confrontation that would decide the war. The Battle of Zama, which was fought in October 202 BC, was a clash of two brilliant commanders, each anticipating the other's tactics. Hannibal deployed perhaps 40,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 80 elephants in his last gamble. Scipio commanded a slightly smaller infantry force, but had a crucial advantage in cavalry, Massinissa's agile Numidian horsemen fighting now for Rome. Hannibal attempted to use his war elephants as a shock weapon to disrupt the Roman legions. At the start of the battle, he ordered a massed elephant charge against Scipio's lines. But Scipio had prepared countermeasures. Roman trumpeters blared and gap lanes opened in the ranks. Many elephants, confused by noise and wounded by javelins, stampeded back into Hannibal's own troops, creating chaos. Others were carefully channeled harmlessly through the lanes by the disciplined Roman maniples. Hannibal's elephant corps, a potential ace up his sleeve, was thus largely nullified or turned against him. The battle then became a grind of infantry. Hannibal's veterans, including the tough men from Italy, fought fiercely against Scipio's legions in close quarters. The Carthaginians initially held their ground, but the decisive moment came when Scipio's Numidian and Roman cavalry, having driven off Hannibal's outnumbered horsemen, swept around and struck Hannibal's rear. This encirclement sealed Carthage's fate, an ironic mirror of Hannibal's own tactics at Cannae. Attacked from behind, Hannibal's formations buckled. After a hard-fought struggle, the Carthaginian army collapsed. Hannibal experienced for the first time a total tactical defeat. Carthaginian losses were catastrophic, an estimated 20,000 killed on the field, with as many captured against relatively light Roman casualties, perhaps 1,500 to 2,000 men. Hannibal himself survived the battle and managed to escape with a small escort, allegedly reproaching himself for not matching Scipio's stratagems that day. Zama was the death blow to Carthage's hopes. Following this final defeat, Hannibal advised his government to sue for peace without delay. Carthage, exhausted and fearful of Roman reprisal, accepted Rome's terms. The peace treaty of 201 BC was harsh. Carthage surrendered its overseas empire. All territories beyond the immediate African homeland were ceded to Rome or Rome's allies. Carthage's once proud navy was scuttled or reduced to a token force. An indemnity of 10,000 talents, an enormous sum, was to be paid over 50 years. And Carthage could not make war, even in Africa, without Rome's permission. In effect, Carthage was left a humbled client state. Hannibal's war, the grand attempt to check Rome's dominance, had failed in the end. The Romans, having endured their darkest hours, emerged as the unchallenged masters of the Western Mediterranean. According to later folklore, the Roman general Scipio met Hannibal after the war and magnanimously acknowledged his foe's prowess. The two legendary commanders reportedly even discussed the greatest generals of history. Hannibal ranked Alexander the Great first, Pyrrhus second, and, with a soldier's pride, claimed that if he himself had beaten Scipio, he would rank third. Scipio smiled, knowing that in truth, Rome had finally bested the indomitable Carthaginian. Though vanquished militarily, Hannibal Barca remained a formidable figure after the war. In Carthage, despite the defeat, he was still respected as the city's savior from complete destruction. In 196 BC, just a few years after Zama, the Carthaginians elected Hannibal as Suffet, chief magistrate, effectively head of state. Turning from battlefield to forum, Hannibal proved himself an able administrator. He initiated bold reforms to root out corruption and restore Carthage's finances. Under his guidance, Carthage swiftly recovered economically. The indemnity payments to Rome were managed without raising taxes on the suffering populace. In fact, Hannibal's financial stewardship was so effective that Carthage's prosperity rose sharply in the years after the war, transforming from a war-ravaged capital into a thriving commercial city once more. It's even believed that Carthage built its famous double harbor, Kothon, during this peaceful revival. But Carthage's quick rebound made Rome uneasy. Hardened Roman politicians like Marcus Cato, Cato the Elder, watched Carthage's renewed wealth with suspicion and old hatred. Cato would famously end his speeches with "Carthago delenda est," meaning Carthage must be destroyed. Romans whispered that Hannibal, the old adversary, might be plotting new wars. By 195 BC, Hannibal's domestic enemies, the aristocratic oligarchs whose corruption he had curbed, seized on Roman pressure to undermine him. A Roman delegation came to Carthage subtly demanding Hannibal's ouster, accusing him of conspiring with Antiochus, the third of the Seleucid Empire, against Rome. Realizing that his life was in danger from both Roman assassins and local political foes, Hannibal made a painful decision. He fled his beloved city into exile. Thus, in 195 BC, Hannibal left Carthage for the last time. He sought refuge first in Tyre, his ancestral city in Phoenicia, and then at the court of King Antiochus III in Syria. Antiochus was preparing for war with Rome, and he welcomed the renowned Carthaginian. Hannibal became a strategic advisor, urging Antiochus to strike Italy directly and even offering to lead an invasion force himself. Despite Hannibal's counsel, Antiochus's war against Rome, the Roman Seleucid War, ended in defeat at Magnesia in 190 BC. As part of the peace in 188 BC, Rome demanded that Antiochus surrender Hannibal. Antiochus, now on the back foot, likely agreed. Hannibal, ever resourceful, sensed the betrayal and escaped once more. First to Crete, then to the kingdom of Bithynia in northwest Anatolia. There, he aided King Prusias in a local war against Rome's ally, King Eumenes II of Pergamon. Even in his late 50s, Hannibal's tactical ingenuity flashed again. He engineered a naval victory by deploying cauldrons of venomous snakes catapulted onto the enemy ships, sowing panic. By 183 BC, however, Hannibal's wanderings were nearing an end. The Romans, led by consul Titus Quinctius Flamininus, relentlessly hunted their old nemesis. They pressured King Prusias to hand over Hannibal. Cornered at last in his refuge at Libissa by the Sea of Marmara, about to be seized, Hannibal refused to give his foes the satisfaction of a public capture. According to classical accounts, he had long carried a poison vial, perhaps in a ring, for just this moment. As Roman soldiers surrounded his villa, the 64-year-old Hannibal ingested poison, proclaiming, "Let us rid the Romans of their fear and me of my life." Or, as another version has it, he said bitterly that the Romans had found it too long, too tedious to wait for an old man's death. Hannibal Barca thus died on his own terms, likely around 183 or 182 BC. Sources differ in the exact date. His tomb, it's said, was built at Libissa, where Libyssan earth, fittingly African earth in foreign soil, covered his remains. After decades of outsmarting and outrunning the Roman Republic, the great Carthaginian general passed into legend, denying Rome the chance to parade him as a captive. Hannibal's legacy as a military genius has endured for over 2 millennia. To this day, he is frequently ranked among history's greatest commanders, often alongside Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon. His bold strategies, especially the envelopment at Cannae, became case studies in generalship. In fact, Cannae is still taught in military academies as the classic example of a double flank encirclement victory. Roman writers, though bitterly hostile, admitted grudging admiration for his feats. The Roman historian Livy described Hannibal as possessing a singular mix of daring and prudence, reckless in initiating battle, calm in the heat of danger, and noted he was more wonderful when facing adversity than when enjoying success. Even after Cannae, when Hannibal's victories had put the very survival of Rome in doubt, the Romans respected the threat he posed. Statues of Hannibal were reportedly erected in Rome after the war, not to honor him, but to remind Romans of the formidable enemy they had overcome. Roman mothers would frighten unruly children by saying, "Hannibal is at the gates." Such was the fear his name evoked that it became proverbial. Throughout history, many generals sought to emulate Hannibal. His innovative use of diverse troops, Spaniards, Gauls, Africans, Greeks, as a cohesive force was studied by later empires. Scipio Africanus, who defeated him, openly acknowledged that much of his own strategy was formed in reaction to Hannibal. Essentially, Hannibal taught the Romans how to fight him. Centuries later, generals like Napoleon Bonaparte praised Hannibal. Napoleon called the Alps crossing an unequaled feat of strategic boldness. Military theorists from the Enlightenment to the modern era have written about Hannibal's uncanny ability to read an enemy and the battlefield. Even the word Fabian for a delay strategy comes from the general who opposed Hannibal, showing how Hannibal forced Rome to adapt fundamentally. No Carthaginian before or after made such an imprint on world history. Hannibal's life also illustrates the limits of brilliance against a superior system. As Polybius and later historians observed, Hannibal won battles, but Rome won the war through its political resilience and vast resources. Some have called Hannibal's campaign a Pyrrhic victory series, dazzling but ultimately not leading to strategic success. Indeed, after Hannibal, there would be no second Hannibal. Carthage never regained military parity with Rome. Within decades, spurred by voices like Cato, Rome would seize the slightest provocation to annihilate Carthage utterly in the Third Punic War of 149 to 146 BC, erasing the city in fire and slaughter. It's a sobering footnote that in 146 BC, Scipio Aemilianus, grandson of Scipio Africanus, wept as he watched Carthage burn, murmuring that all great cities and powers must eventually fall, even his own Rome. Hannibal's war had shown Rome its mortality, even though Rome emerged victorious. Yet, in another sense, Hannibal achieved everlasting immortality. His name became a byword for resourcefulness and determination against overwhelming odds. Many underdog peoples in later history identified with Hannibal and Carthage. In the 19th century, for example, Irish nationalists romanticized Hannibal as an ancestor and symbol, comparing Ireland to Carthage against the Roman might of the British Empire. Military leaders from Frederick the Great to U.S. Civil War generals studied and sometimes invoked Hannibal's tactics. The aura of the man who brought Rome to the brink is enduring. As the poet Robert Frost mused in his poem Hannibal, reflecting on the lost cause, even a cause too lost, or that showed with the lapse of time too vain for the generous tears of youth and song. The image of Hannibal, proud and unconquered in spirit even as fortune turned against him, has a tragic, heroic appeal that resonates through the ages. Hannibal Barca was undeniably a man of the African continent, a fact that has made him a potent figure in the history and imagination of Africa. Born in what is now Tunisia, Hannibal is often celebrated as one of Africa's great military heroes. In modern Tunisia, he is regarded with pride as a national icon. In 2013, Tunisia even featured what is thought to be Hannibal's likeness, the so-called Capuan bust, on its 5 dinar banknote, claiming the ancient general as part of Tunisia's cultural heritage. Tunisians today grow up learning that their ancestors produced the warrior who once humbled the might of Rome. Across North Africa, Hannibal is remembered not as a foreigner, but as a native son, a symbol that North Africa had advanced civilizations and leaders to rival those of Europe. That said, Hannibal's ethnic and cultural identity has been subject to much modern discussion. Carthaginians were originally Phoenician settlers from the Near East, modern Lebanon. They were a Semitic people, often of olive or light brown complexion, distinct from the darker-skinned populations of sub-Saharan Africa. Thus, in modern terms, Hannibal would not be described as black African. He was ethnically Punic, with ancestry tied to the Levant. However, the world of the ancient Mediterranean was one of extensive mixing and diversity. Carthage had existed for over 600 years by Hannibal's time, and its people had intermixed with indigenous North Africans, Berbers, Numidians, to some degree. Hannibal's own family exemplified this blend. His brothers and sisters' marriages into Numidian royalty suggest a fusion of Punic and Berber bloodlines. In a real sense, Hannibal embodied a fusion of African and Phoenician heritage, part of the rich tapestry of North Africa's history. In the broader African historical landscape, some have viewed Hannibal as an early anti-imperialist figure, an African-led power challenging European domination. During the era of European colonialism, Hannibal's defiance of Rome carried new resonance. He became a symbol of African resistance and ingenuity. His story was cited by Pan-Africanists and scholars who sought to highlight Africa's contributions to world civilization and military art. The question, was Hannibal black, has even entered popular culture debates, though it oversimplifies ancient identities. As one historian notes, the ancient Romans saw Hannibal as African from Africa, but their concept of race differed greatly from ours. To them, African often meant anyone from north of the Sahara, Carthaginians, Numidians, and so on, who were typically of a complexion somewhere between Europeans and Ethiopians. Modern scholars emphasize that applying contemporary racial categories to Hannibal is speculative at best. What remains beyond debate is that Hannibal is firmly an African legend. He stands alongside figures like Egypt's Ramses or Ethiopia's Menelik in the pantheon of great African leaders of antiquity. In the annals of African accomplishment, Hannibal's generalship shines as proof that the continent produced strategists of genius who shaped global history. His African identity also provides a nuanced understanding that North Africa has long been an integral part of the continent's story, with Carthage as a vibrant center of Afro-Mediterranean civilization. Today, one can stroll through the ruins of Carthage near Tunis and find a statue of Hannibal gazing seaward. It reminds visitors that this African city once nearly altered the course of Western history under Hannibal's command. In Tunisia, children on school trips eagerly recount how our Hannibal took his elephants over the Alps to frighten Rome. Such pride underscores Hannibal's lasting place in the African collective memory. In the end, Hannibal Barca's saga is both epic and poignant. It's the tale of a warrior from Africa who grew up amidst his people's defeat and vowed never to accept subjugation. He became the scourge of Rome, a living nightmare to the mightiest republic of its time. He was at once a brilliant, compassionate leader to his diverse troops, sharing their hardships and earning unwavering loyalty, and, according to hostile Roman reports, a ruthless avenger who brought war to the Italian heartland. His life was marked by breathtaking victories and ultimate defeat, by steadfast honor and lifelong exile. It is a story that combines the factual drama of history with the timeless quality of myth. Little wonder that Hannibal's legend endures, retold in documentaries, novels, even video games, as the quintessential narrative of boldness versus empire. From the standpoint of the 21st century, we remember Hannibal not only for his tactics or battles, but for his indomitable spirit. He personifies the idea that a brilliant individual, fueled by a fierce sense of purpose and perhaps a child's oath, can shake the foundations of the world's greatest power. Hannibal Barca did just that, earning immortality as the Lion of Carthage, an African hero who defied Rome and nearly won, forever capturing the imagination of all who hear his tale. The Alps have melted, the war elephants are long gone, but the footsteps of Hannibal Barca still echo across the mountains and battlefields he once walked. He did not live to see Rome fall, but for a time he made the unshakable tremble, and in that defiance he etched his name into eternity as Africa's greatest general and one of history's most brilliant minds of war. His story is a reminder that the courage to stand against giants can echo for centuries. That even when the world's mightiest power towers over you, one person's vision and the will to see it through can change the course of history. This is the legacy of Hannibal Barca. This is the voice of our past. You've been watching Tales of the Ancestors. If this story moved you, like, share and subscribe so that the voices of our forebears rise again and history never fades into silence.